going to have a conversation today about the place that technology and biophilic design intersect. And I'm excited to go into this conversation. My name is Njeri. We've met, this is the third time we're meeting for those that were here yesterday. It's really wonderful to be up here with you, Roy, and Catherine, and Charles. So I will start by introducing you, just saying a bit more about you. And this is, like I said yesterday, this is the boring part, and then we'll get into the exciting part, because I'm going to read. So, starting over at the end to my left is Catherine Mungai. She's a senior program officer in climate and biodiversity engagement with organization IUCN Kenya country. I need some help. Thank you, Etta. Okay, come sit here. Come sit here. Come sit with Mama. Good. Experienced policy and research engagement specialist with a demonstrated history of working in environmental and natural resources management, skilled in gender and youth integration, program evaluation, communication, report writing, and program development with a master's degree focused on environmental governance, over 15 years of experience in developing and expanding learning partnerships and supporting science policy engagement processes in Africa, and also at the global level with a focus on integrating biodiversity, gender, climate change, and agriculture policies and programs. So welcome, welcome. And then Charles Mbatha, who is a graduate architect and researcher focused on sustainable materials, construction tech, and cultural heritage in architecture. Excuse me. Karibu. Then we just heard from Roy, so we have a sense of who he is. But just to learn a bit more of the hard data. Roy is a certified graduate master of architecture from Curtin University with over 6 years experience in architectural design, spatial planning, project management, and branding. His previous research involved the design of education institutions in informal urban settlements with a focus on the improvement of the quality of space. He analyzed the current state of classrooms in the informal urban settlements by referring to the different environmental conditions, for example, ventilation and air quality, physical conditions like site location and context, and social cultural conditions, for instance, health, sanitation, and culture, found in these settlements. He is currently involved in sustainable design research and community-based design. His efforts have been acknowledged through leadership awards and award nominations in Malaysia and Australia, respectively. He currently serves on the board of the Kenya Green Building Society, KGBS, as the head of technical committee, where he leads the research on alternative building materials and technologies for affordable housing. He is also a nominee for the prestigious Architects Board of Western Australia Graduate Award 2020. Karibu. And lastly, he's also the founder of Muda Design. So welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. And I think a good place to begin would be just to hear in your own words what it is you do and the relevance of it to this conversation about the meeting point of tech and biophilic design. So let's start with you, Catherine, and just move back towards me.
Apologies, my voice decided to start disappearing this morning, but I'll try and do my best because I could not decline to come as I'd already committed to coming. So I'll just speak as much as I can with, just bear with me. So Like I've been introduced, I'm Catherine Mungai. I work with the International Union for Conservation of Nature. And as you can tell from the name, we focus more on conserving nature, but for people and also for the environment. I work with the Kenya Country Office. I focus mostly on climate change issues and biodiversity issues. And for today, I'll be talking a bit about nature-based solutions. And I think we already had in the morning, we talked about nature-based education. And I think we've also been talking about how we can integrate nature into our buildings. And I think that's what this panel will be talking about. So I'll be sharing about tools that we can use to assess to what extent we're integrating nature into our into our environment. So I'll talk about the nature-based solution, and IUCN has also introduced what we are calling the Urban Nature Index, which is also an online tool that we can use to track to what extent our buildings are also meeting or integrating nature. So I'm looking forward to that, and it's a pleasure to be here today.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I come from a group of guys who say they hear the mother tongue, but they can't really speak it. In my journey through architecture school, I came across a book titled Architecture Without Architects, and in perusing it, I got conflicted a lot about how it is I could lend myself to the practice. And for my final year research thesis, I was able to integrate this through a framework that explores technology as an advancement in the techniques and in the materials that we have, and how these advancements lend us into looking into the future with the same materials and techniques that is beholden to us. And my name is Charles Musyoki, and it's a great pleasure to be able to share on my experiences.
I'll try and keep it short. I know time is of an essence. However, as was earlier introduced, my name is Roy Githaiga. Let me segue for a bit. Let me also give you the reason, or rather, what my name means. I was just having this conversation earlier. Githaiga traditionally means a traditional witch doctor. Don't be afraid of me. The reason I bring this up is because when we talk about culture-centered design, which is now what Muda design also does do, is we need to understand who we are in order to understand where we're going, right? My basis, well, my history is in architecture, but I found myself doing a lot more research in how affordable housing, or at least resilient housing, can be done. And I also started doing some research in technology to try and see how we can have more resilient structures. So I developed a comparative analysis that looks at housing in Kenya, but that's also pegged from how we can also take that type of study and replicate it in other areas, other regions in Africa. But that's still in development, still early stage. When I say early stage, 4 years now. But it's something that I'm constantly building, and it's opened certain interesting facets of that research into waste management. So as I sit here, I'm also doing research in waste management. And so architecture is what started my journey, but then I found myself doing so many other things. Like at KGBS, I'm the one who leads the technical committee, and we talk about alternative building materials. And as of last year, we released a materials handbook. It's downloadable on the website. And that research was not just desktop. We went on the ground in different parts of Kenya to understand the materials that are available in different areas of the country, so that it gives an understanding of how affordability can be done, because affordability is also a term based on context. And it's something that we realize that we have to do it in a specific manner that is not the norm, right? So breaking that norm or decentralizing that type of research or how it's done is very important, especially for the understanding of what we do now. So yes, I do design buildings, I design residential houses, but I do that also understanding that there's a culture embedded in that. So when I say culture, there are two facets. There's one that is the culture of the person who the house is for. So I talk about the quality of space of a specific house, for instance. And culture is how you live, how you operate. But then if it's also being built in a specific region, then we start looking at materials, we start looking at the people who are around. So even the laborers come from the same region. I don't import laborers. If I'm doing a house in Machakos, I'm not going to import laborers from Nairobi. So it's everyone from that area. So it's also about creating like a sense of space, a sense of place for the local community. So when something is meant to be sustainable, the community also needs to be able to understand its use and its benefits. Yeah, I can go down the rabbit hole when I start talking about this, but yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you, thank you. We all have a better sense of who you are and what interests you, what areas of the built environment you're touching and are impacting. And so my first question would be, from the little research and a lot of it being from Mungai, that I've done, and this is to you, Charles, first off, 3D printing in Earth. That's a whole question. What does that mean? How does that look? Yeah.
Well, I'll try to break it down from my origin story. Mm-hmm. So I started off by looking at earth and construction. There's a map that shows the distribution of earth and construction globally, and it's the most wide form of construction technology. And in that construction technology, it has 12 different techniques, and this varies depending on the context where it's from. And so, and it also acts as an extension of the place. So for example, you have based on the moisture content, and then you also have based on the vegetative quality that lends to supporting it as a structure. And these inform the different areas where earth and construction can exist. When talking about construction technology, there's the construction technique, which is the means in which the materials come together, and the materials being the earth or the vegetative matter. So the theory moves along in that if you innovate for the technique, being how things come together, and the materials, you can be able to make what was indigenous for us relevant or leap forward it to a new age. So 3D printing earth, I'd say, is a form of cob construction in the quality of the material, and that it's a bit runny, and a mixture of rammed earth. So it goes, you basically feed your design into a machine that then generates the wall for you. In translation of how we're used to it in the industry, it's an additive form of construction. You go brick by brick till you get to the top. And it's a similar technique also in 3D printing. So it's a form of rammed earth in that when the deposition of the material happens, there's the effect of ramming that builds the strength over time. Yeah, that's where my explorations go.
Thank you. That's very interesting. I mean, we had the conversation yesterday about materials, and again, where building materials meet biophilic design. And we had someone that presented on rammed earth, and I have some knowledge on super adobe building, cob building. So it's very exciting, and we'll come round to that again, but I'm curious about how the past and the future are meeting in the present right now with technology. But I want to go to you, Roy, and continue that. My curiosity is how you've talked about creating data repositories in different areas and research in different areas. I'm curious about what he's doing and how that meets the data you're collecting. The booklet you've described just how we make available the technology he's exploring to him. You know, how we make it so that we're not just speaking in the reduced language that English can be. And for those of us that can hear our mother tongues, but not speak them, I think every field does have a language of its own as a way to communicate what's going on in that field. And then that borrows from a language, in our case, fortunately, or you know, for better or worse, English most of the time. I live in Tanzania, so it's been interesting having these conversations with professionals in Kiswahili. And I constantly have to be like, what's that? You know, but just the language aspect, because data has to be communicated through some language. So how are we and how are you combining all of that, this innovative language, creating data repositories that are available for those that can currently speak the language, but also evolving that language into something that will be useful and can prepare the mind for a biophilic future that is inclusive of tech for this guy?
I think there are 3 parts to your question that I'll address. The first is on accessibility. So he's just mentioned on 3D printing. The booklet that we produced looks at alternative building materials and technologies in 3 ways. So there's appropriate materials, there's an alternative, and there's emerging. So those 3 the 3 terms specifically work together, but they're also very separate. With regards to accessibility, and I'll come back to the 3 terms, with regards to accessibility, the research that we have done is open sourced. The reason why we decided to also have it open sourced is because a lot of this work is done in silos. And the problem of working in silos is that you'll find an organization doing the same thing as another organization doing the same thing, whereas if they worked together, that work would have been accessible in half the time. So what's the point of having 5 different organizations doing the same thing in the same region and their data is not open sourced? And I guess there are different facets that you can look at it. Maybe they come from different countries, maybe they come, but I'm bringing it back to Kenya. I'm localizing it. Internationally, you can say, yes, there are different people who are doing different things and maybe they look similar. But for his future, I would say having something that is open sourced and readily available means that when he grows up and as he is growing up and he wants to know how your great-grandparents built their house, or how colonization changed how we build our houses, or something like that, it means that it's a click away. Technology is moving so fast that right now a lot of people use AI on a day-to-day basis. And if we don't feed that information in the right manner, we don't get the result in the right manner. And that's why people are told when they're using ChatGPT, OpenAI, is that you need to also, once you get the information, please go and also do some work, edit, research. Make sure that that work is actually true. Because there's a lot of greenwashing and there's a lot of truth and non-truths. But if you're not careful, you might be put in a loop that is not, let me say, conducive to what you want to do. So I've done 1 and 2. The third one is on the future. And that's why I'm bringing out the emerging technologies. Now, there are a lot of technologies right now within the current African, I would say, concepts in architecture, in design, in whatever it is, could be communication, it doesn't really matter which it is, but the fact that he's working on an emerging technology means that there is a future for it. It also means that there is accessibility for that type of information because it's gotten as far as he has. That means when we talk about appropriate materials and alternatives, yes, we can build a house with concrete, but can we also build it in timber? Can we also build? So that's what I mean by an alternative. So you're getting out of what is conventionally done to something that can be an alternative because you want to solve a specific problem, but then you also need to look at the future. So what does that future have? So those are the 3 different levels of appropriate, alternative, and emerging. So when you look at it in all facets, you see that there's an emerging chain. So when you talk about language, my sister is in media. And part of her work was to go to she's younger than me, she's 7 years younger than I am, but when she started learning how to speak her mother tongue, means that she had to go back to my grandparents. So getting that information direct from my grandparents and, the elderly, that's our ancestors living, means that she also got an understanding of what it means to be a Githaika, right? So there is that. So it's about putting your foot, as I said earlier, take a step back and see where you've come from so that you can understand where you're going. So that in itself, in terms of understanding where you come from, or at least understanding your own language, and now putting it in, open sourcing it, basically, makes it accessible for everyone to understand that housing, the same way you've talked about being in Tanzania and having these conversations in Swahili, because to them, that is their culture, that's how they do it. Now, you can't come and do the same thing here in Nairobi because it's going to seem, out of the blue, right? But imagine if that was a norm in Africa where each area of Africa had data accessible to the discussion we're having right now, but in different languages. So it's all about collecting that data and making it open sourced, so that when he's growing up, he has access to it. I hope I've answered your question.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, you have, thank you. And Catherine, to you now, just thinking about the, what you've just described, appropriate, what was that? There was emerging, appropriate? Yes, appropriate, emerging, and alternative. Based on what I've understood of what you've described of your work, it sounds to me like what you are doing is now developing a language that then bridges those 3 areas with indexes and can then meet where the alternative meets the appropriate, and then the emerging, and so on and so forth, and sort of creates a cyclic form around these 3, and then some. So the question for you is, how does the work you're doing meet the work that Charles and Roy are doing?
Yeah, thank you for that. I kind of feel like the odd man out here. Feel very scientific and a bit more technical. Prepared my intervention, so you'll just allow me to read, because I was just trying to see how to fit into the space. I also explained to Angwe, it's a little bit new for me. But when we talk about nature-based solutions, and I think that's kind of what we're talking about, it's like we're now trying to put the actual activities that are happening on the ground, but we're trying now to ground them in science. We're trying to link them to research, to kind of link to the work that we're doing. I don't know if I'm going to use those slides. I put together some slides, but I can go through them very fast, if that's okay, or I can just speak to your, can I? Okay, I think since the slides have been put up, I can quickly use that. So I was just going to talk about how we can transform African cities using nature-based solutions. And as you can see in the image, the description of nature-based solutions are actions that we can use to protect and to sustainably manage our resources, and also to restore natural ecosystems. I think I had someone earlier talking about our ecosystems, and then we can also use these kinds of solutions to see how we can manage climate change. We can ensure that we have access to food, we can ensure that we have access to water, and also we can manage natural disasters. Like we can see right now, when it rains, Nairobi gets very flooded, and you can find that some of these buildings are actually put up in wetlands, areas where water is supposed to be allowed to pass through. So when you think about nature-based solutions and you think about environmental impact assessments, I think that's what the Kenya Green Building Society and other organizations do. That's why we need these environmental impact assessments, the social environmental assessments, so that they can help us to define where we're going to put up these kinds of structures. And at the same time, we also need, when we talk about the biodiversity benefits, is what we've been talking about since morning, about nature and what nature gives to us. So in terms of even the sense of well-being, Um, my voice is really stressing me out, but anyway. So when we talk about nature-based solutions, also the challenges that we are facing in terms of climate change, food scarcity, water scarcity. So when we are building our houses, how we integrate like rainwater harvesting technologies, even in the urban areas, to help us address some of these challenges. We're also talking about the socio-economic aspects. So how are we going to ensure that our young people have jobs? And even as we continue to come up with these the solutions that you're talking about, how do we ensure that they're not creating a gender divide? I'm happy to see here that we have so many women in the space. Sometimes you find it so, there's this divide, you find it's really men who are really taking up these things, but it's good to see that women are also involved in this conversation. So those are just some of the things that we do when we use the nature-based solutions tool. And then it's just really creating, it's just an opportunity for us to have a hybrid, because we have a lot of the gray infrastructure that we are talking about. Even as cities in Africa continue to grow, we have a lot of gray infrastructures, the buildings that are coming up, but then we need to find a way how we can link in with the natural infrastructure. So you can see, like, I think, is it Greenhouse on Ngong Road, they tried to also have like plants outside in the building, and I think those kinds of combinations of nature and the green infrastructure, they have a role that they play, because we've talked about, I think Ray talked about, when it's hot, when it's cold, but how can we combine the old, the traditional knowledge that we have with the modern knowledge that we have? Because when we talk about cities growing, we look at New York, which is what we call a concrete jungle, and I feel like Nairobi, we're headed in that direction, to be honest. Come to Kilimani, it's like, but then what opportunities are there? And I'm so glad we still have Karura Forest, for example. I think in Rwanda also, they are trying to come up with all these kinds of green spaces where we can go and relax. And then this is just to summarize why nature-based solutions matter for African cities. I know it's really like at the high level, and we are really talking about practical solutions, but it's just really what I mentioned, to reduce disasters, to help us manage the heat. So with the pavements and the concrete jungles, when we integrate nature-based solutions, this can help us. And then, of course, creating green jobs, and then also protecting our biodiversity, and really the mental and physical health. I think we had that in the morning about the Waldorf school, I think. Yeah, it's a very expensive school. But then, because they've integrated nature and how that can improve our mental and physical health. Then I think if we move to the next slide, I think it's probably I'm about to wind up. Who was moving the slides? Yeah, can go to the next one. Yeah, so we can go to the next one. This is just about where we need to work in partnerships. So I think that's the Kenya Green Building Society. I was not here yesterday, maybe they introduced themselves more, but I think we need to work through partnerships. And then this is really about the urban nature indexes. This is an online tool, you can access it. And I think it would be interesting for the group here, where we're talking about integrating nature into buildings. So I think this is something you can look at. It's been developed by IUCN, but also in partnership with other organizations that are focusing on urbanization, and just giving us tools that we can actually use to track what we are doing. So it has indicators, it's science-based, and then it's anyone, Kakamega, Nairobi, New York, I mean, it's kind of structured to be able to give us something that we can all use in order to be able to track our impact. And then if we move to the next slide. Yeah, so these are just the themes against or along which that tool has been developed. So it's about consumption. When we talk about the energy consumption in the cities, we're talking about the human pressure, like now with the buildings that are coming up all over, and we are really destroying our environment. So it helps us to look at those kinds of pressures, the habitat. Karura Forest, we have unique trees, we have the animals, we have the birds, and I think our moderator today told us to look at birds when we are dressing. I think I tried. But anyway, those kinds of things, the species, very, really moving down to the the basic things of when we talk about biodiversity. And then, of course, all these things that we are doing actually is for the people. So when we talk about the communities, even as we continue to design, we need to have the people at the center of our minds. And then, of course, the governance. You've talked about the policies and the strategies that are being developed in the counties or something, and where are they different. But then maybe we need to come together to see how we can have something that's more, either it has to be locally specific, but then also standardized, so that we're all speaking the same language. I think the next slide should be my last slide, and I think I'll have answered all your questions. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, so this is really what to think about when we're talking about an African approach to nature-based solutions. We're talking about the indigenous knowledge. I think you've talked about linking indigenous knowledge with, I think, the 3D. So it's just kind of, what did we used to see before, and how do we link this? I think someone talked about the Winners Chapel and the basket and all that. Of course, using locally available materials, and then working together with the community so that we don't have a top-down approach, rather that we're working in a bottom-up approach where we're working together. And then, of course, just thinking about the cooling of temperatures and the green jobs and our health. So I think that should be it. My apologies for derailing you, but some of us work better with PowerPoint presentations. Death by PowerPoint, but yeah, I think it was the only one, so it's fine.
Thank you so much for that. And to say something to that, I think all these forms of understanding, all these forms of communicating, all these forms of processing data are important and even necessary, because we are living in the age that we're living in of tech. We have to be able to communicate and to envision, to see through technology, but our feet need to be on the ground. And that's what I hear and see just in the work that the three of you are doing, and we all are doing in this group with this expo, that at the end of the day, we need to be able to see what's going on globally. We need to have a good sense of what the global temperature is with regards to this. We need to be able to have a sense of, okay, at a national level, at a local level, where the materials are different, where culture is different, where languages are different, where all of these things are different. And yet, we need to be able to make sure that all the structures that are being built in these areas are not collapsing on people. You know, so there has to be, like you're saying, a certain level of standardization, even when we're building with different materials, even when we're considering different cultural understandings, different cultural ways, when we're exploring different technologies. Yesterday, we had a conversation with Mycotile, the founder of Mycotile, and he's talking about building using mushrooms. Today we've gone into cob, and we also had rammed earth yesterday, which sounds like it's part of the technology within the technology that you're using. So all of these things are necessary, and I think what you said earlier about it all being siloed is what's creating a big problem, because we find that we're reinventing the wheel, and dude next door has been working on exactly the same thing, but then because we're not talking to each other, because we don't have spaces where this information is being passed and circulated and therefore evolved, we're stuck in this, we have to go back into the past. And I said this yesterday, there's a lot of resistance, with that, because we're like, okay, we're progressing, why are we being asked to go back to the past? But when we have access to the information you just gave, then the person that's innovating can see, okay, in this area, they have really good soil, but it floods very easily. So the technology I apply there is going to be different from the technology that gets applied in the highlands, where the soil might be different, or the challenges might be different. You're building for the cold, So my last question with this is, it's a bit of a boring one, but what are some of the challenges? It's a bit, the major challenge that, and I'll invite you to think of what the next person has said on this panel. What is a challenge that you have experienced in your work that he might be answering, or Catherine might have an answer to, and where you could see potential synergy, and you don't even have to work together after this, but but I'm just curious, having the three of you up here doing fairly different and within the same ecosystem, what are some of the issues that are coming up in your individual spaces that, in hearing Roy speak, in hearing Charles speak, in hearing Catherine speak, you're like, oh, okay, I can see something there that could be a solution or could be half of an answer to a question I've been asking.
Let me start by saying that I have studied nature-based solutions. I'm actually certified. We'll talk on the side. The challenge has always been the same for a very long time, and that's accessibility of information. The reason I say that as the main challenge because it's pegged on everything, from education to working in silos to, it's all about access to that information. We also have governance issues that I don't want to get too deep into, but I will speak on one thing. By the simple fact that we understand, or at least we know, that we have 7 different climatic conditions in 42 different counties, as I mentioned earlier. And are they 42? 47. Yeah, see? Anyway, we have more counties than we need. We have 7 conditions. We used to have 8 provinces. And why do we have 47 now? Like, okay, let me bring that thought back down. I was going down a rabbit hole. The consensus of what I'm trying to say is we can actually create rules and regulations for our built environment as per those 7 different conditions. It is good and it's actually advisable to have one building code for the country. But it is more beneficial or most beneficial to have building guidelines for each and every one of those environmental conditions. Because then you focus on a material basis that is contextualized. You also look at building techniques that are not necessarily tribe-based or tribal-based or, environmentally conditional-based. That is one of the things that I'm looking at, and putting that data together is not easy. And that is where now you have things like nature-based solutions coming in, because she talked about wetlands and peatlands, and you realize Kilimani was a swamp. Part of Karen was a swamp. Why are there high-rise buildings coming in that space? And Kilimani, unfortunately, Kilimani Lavington is gone. Hurlingham is gone. We can't really turn back that clock. But we have spaces that we can actually restore and regenerate using our own inherent knowledge. So we have knowledge that is tangible and intangible. But now how do we put that together as accessible information for everyone, either practicing or experiencing? Because we may call ourselves practitioners of the built environment, but we are all, and people who are not even in this room, we are all experiencing the same space. So how do we actually benefit, or what do we do to benefit where we live, how we access the roads, let me give you a small example. What happens when it rains in Nairobi? Traffic. It can be 5 minutes of rain, but the roads don't change. The routes don't become longer. But we all have this understanding of, it's raining, let me go home early. And then we are all stuck in traffic for the longest time. If you left an hour later, you'd have still gotten home at the same time. Do you understand? It's like a culture of understanding of how things operate. So that's why I talk about culture-centered design so much, that there's a reason why we do things. Some of it can be based on information that we have, but then some of it is just based on intangible knowledge. Kukinyesha lazima nifike nyumbani mapema. You see, I'm just using that as an example, but it's all about accessibility and how that information can be given, or at least can be accessible to everyone at the same way, at the same pace, at the same time. I mean, we talk about technology, we're talking about technology so much that we don't realize that we have technology every single day. We interact with it on our phones. We have access to all the information that we need. But a lot of that information, as we said earlier, is in silos. So how do we destructure that whole, government institutions do the same thing. So you have the Ministry of Water, but then you also have the Ministry of Natural Resources. You see what I mean? Like they do the same thing. So I have two, right? Anyway, I'm going down a rabbit hole that it's very emotional on my part, but then again, we need to be more intentional with what we do, and that's also where your work comes in, because everything is very intentional. You want to build because the earth is telling you X and Y, or you want to preserve it because the earth is telling you X and Y, right? I'll stop.
Your turn.
Well, it is interesting just to hear you guys go ahead of me. I think for me, my greatest challenges have been, one, information and policy. After having gotten some knowledge on 3D printed earth and construction, there are practical examples in Kenya of 3D printed construction, and my experience of being in that space is that stakeholder engagement should have been done better. I believe there should be a value addition to the context that occurred in, but the fact that it's still a dream of an innovation is quite baffling, whereas it still occurred. So that led me to actually want to complete the full series of my investigations or my experiments, which was in looking at the vegetative material and the possibilities of innovations in technology. So I ended up looking at bamboo construction. Bamboo is classified as a grass, and it's quite interesting to hear what you've been up to, because there are a lot of, if you look at the Philippines, for example, they've managed to shift an entire economy just based on technology integration to the local farmer. The image here actually illustrates on a great example of the principle behind it, in that from extraction to construction, what exactly is our design intent? And this is something that technologies could aid us in that we are honing in that level of experience. That's in a nutshell, those have been some of my encounters.
Thank you. Catherine, to end it for us.
Yeah, okay. I'll keep it short because I think Roy and Charles have covered basically the main issues. But for me, when I think about the challenges, is what you also said about we work in silos, we do our things in silos, but I think we need to speak to each other more. So for me, all my work is focused on the nature side of things, on the conservation side of things, working with the climate change ministry, working with the wildlife ministry. So we speak to each other. We are talking to the converted. But then, like now by coming here, I realize there's so much that we can do together, even together with architects. But the meetings that I go to, honestly, maybe in the climate change space, I think I've had the Kenya Green Business Society are there, so you'll find some architects in those meetings. But then I work a lot also on biodiversity, policy issues. For sure, I don't think we have anyone from this particular space. And as I was listening, I feel like that's a big gap, because what we are doing here in terms of, even as we look into the cities in Africa expanding, even in Kenya we are growing, there's a need for us to bridge those gaps. So there's definitely a need for us to work together. And so maybe Wangui will tell us how we are going to create this kind of a platform where we get out of our species and get out of our silos. Because even health, when we talk about the environment, we're talking about health issues. So we just need to see how we can, and COVID actually made us realize the importance of nature. And I think by that time, because we were just in, I think we are the enemy, because when we were indoors, the environment took time and recovered, and you just see the animals coming out, reclaiming their space. But anyway, so I think we need to speak to each other more, and I really appreciate this particular platform. And yeah, let's see, you'll tell us how we move from here. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. This has been informative but also inspiring, to know that some of the questions, I know personally there's a couple of questions I've been asking that have been answered right here between the three of you. And also within, just the expo as it's unfolded since yesterday. And I agree, I was actually going to direct this towards Wangoi and be like, okay, so you've heard, we need more of this, and it's time, and I hear this, I mentioned yesterday that I work mostly in the regenerative food and seed systems and women's health. Those are my main areas. And even in those spaces, I hear the same thing of, we're meeting, we get called to these meetings, it's the same faces, it's the same conversations. And what happens is, if you're not getting challenged, if you're not challenging each other, iron sharpens iron. And if we're just sharpening ourselves and each other in the same silo, we arrive at a certain sharpness that all of us have. So there's no one to do that further. So I agree. Let's figure out how to get into more spaces that involve and include a lot more fields, because that's how ecosystems work. You have the tall trees, the short trees, the underground. It needs every single aspect of each one of us, of our environments, cultural, socioeconomic, all of these things need to be put more often in the same space, to have open, honest conversations, ask the questions that are very uncomfortable, have those uncomfortable conversations, because that's where we get the kind of the kind of answers we are asking, those questions we are asking. So thank you so much for being part of this question asking and answering in your life. And I am sorry, but we're not going to have a Q&A for this panel because we're needing to catch up with time. But I believe you're still around. Yes, so if you have questions, please find them, engage with them. And as you've been told, there's the QR at the back. It takes you to, you can schedule a meeting, ask some questions. But let's keep doing this. Thank you so much.
All right.